Hello and welcome back to the worst Warmachine channel on the internet. I'm Elorian, and it's time for a very special Warmachine Weekly because we have Dorian here. Dorian, how's it going?
Good. How's it going with you, Brian?
Not too bad. Just, I got a bunch of my Infernals killed is what I just did.
Yeah, well, I stayed out of all the zones, so my opponent had no problems controlling the circles, so...
Yeah, you know. Luckily, we're not here to talk about tactics today. We're here to talk about fluff. So, in our area here, and maybe just in, like, Canada, Dorian is, like, a big-time fluff aficionado. Like, you know, I'm not good at fluff. When I go on to Servant of Nero and listen to those things, there's a lot of things I learned about. I was like, wow, I didn't even know that exists. And you've been playing since Mark 1, right?
Since Mark 1, yep. Since the black and white book. I still have the black and white book.
I don't even know what the black and white book is. I assume is that like the original...
The original book, black and white. All the cards were black and white, yep.
Okay, fair enough. So, the big thing that Dorian wanted to cover here, because he's actually one of our content overlords that jumped in for a month because he wanted this video, so we're going to make this happen, is you want to talk about the Hench scrolls on Twitter. So there's been a lot of interesting stories there. Unfortunately, I've not actually read them all. I've been just kind of like watching the summaries on Facebook. So, yeah, you have a lot of interesting things you want to talk about, right?
Yeah, you know, big shout out to Servant of Nero, by the way. I'm loving his videos. Just... yeah. What a fascinating guy, fascinating voice. Yeah, so we're gonna go over the what's evolved in the fluff between the beginning of Hench Scrolls to now. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite crazy. I consolidated all of it into a bunch of 7 font pages, and back to back there is approximately 40 pages. So that's 80 pages of fluff. There was over, I think, 60,000 words.
Yeah.
This is more fluff than they've released in the last 3 books.
It's a lot. I kind of thought in prepping for this, is like, okay, yesterday when I got home from work, I was going to open it up and read through it. But some of these things, there's so many. And as I started scrolling down and down and down to try and get to the start of the second half, I was like, no, there's no way I can do this before bed. So luckily you know all this stuff. So
yeah, I had to read through all of it to condense it all down. So
yeah. So where did you want to start with this? What's our first story?
So just a quick overview of what's happened, right? So obviously the beginning of the Hench Scrolls, we have the blind hermit of Hench going from place to place, talking to the different people, warning them of the upcoming claiming, the calamity that will destroy the Western world. Kador and Signar just started a peace, then war. They ended their initial border war, and then they started a whole new brand war. When they're trying to claim the Umbrian part of Lael.
Okay.
And this is the beginning of the book and the book series Stormfront. So then we get into aeronautical warfare. That quickly ends when the claiming happens, and they realize, oh, we have a common foe now. So from there, all the factions, everyone kind of gets together and goes, okay, well, how are we going to deal with these Infernals? Well, let's ship a whole bunch of our people off planet because I guess the Convergence has a great idea in this.
Flee.
Flee.
Sometimes, you know, the best way to beat something is just to run away from it.
Yeah.
So,
so you know, that's where we get the first initial parts of the stories, where we have, you know, the big epic battle at Hench, where we lose Clog, we lose Vlad, who we see earlier get talked to the Old Witch, and we've known for a while that his bloodline was doomed. He was destined to die. Turns out he's not destined to be without child, though, because he has 2.
yeah.
One with Sorsha, who flees off planet, and then the other one with the Queen Anne, who may or may not be alive. I think the IKRPG is suggesting that she is in fact alive and firm control, but we'll see. A lot of that stuff isn't quite out yet, and so I haven't picked up my hard copies of those books. So
I guess something to keep in mind too is my understanding is that with these Hench scrolls, they might not all even be true. They're like mad visions, and some might be visions of the future, and some might be like completely false, or maybe there's like multiple possible futures, and so like maybe we didn't go down that branch. Is that correct?
That's correct. One of the big things in the IKRPG fluff, all of it stemming back from the D20 days, was that a lot of it is told through an unreliable narrator. So a lot of the IKRPG books are told through either Gavin Kyle,
okay,
who's the spy master and tends to leak all this information, or Arthur Pendrake.
Okay.
Or Victor Pendrake.
Yeah.
And you know, everything is told from his point of view. So, but you have this unreliable narrator, right? In all the Warmachine books, you'll notice it's all told from certain points of view, but it's not an like a godlike view where you can see everything. It's all told from what is known as an unreliable narrator.
It's probably the safe thing to do, because if you ever paint yourself into a corner and be like, oh yeah, I forgot that was canon, you can just be like, well, actually that was a false vision or whatever, right?
Well, maybe Khador gets a little bit more slander because the guy who's talking about them doesn't like Khador.
Or maybe they're also trash.
Well, there are
Stevie.
Right? So in the visions, they're all again told through this unreliable narrator who is the Mad Hermit. Now, they have confirmed that most of the stuff has happened, right? Vlad is truly dead.
Yeah.
The god, or the elves have been truly defeated.
Oh, if I remember as well, from the first half of the Hench scrolls, like some of them were in regular text, some of them were in italics, or some of them like also like more grayed out, and people were wondering like, is that the code of knowing what's real and what's not?
That was a big conversation point. They've never really revealed it. The big thing was the images being inverted in color. You had a lot of them in normal color, and then you would have it like in a darker or redder scale, and being like, well, what does this mean?
Fair enough. All right.
So we get to the Battle of the Henchhold. It seems to take place. It takes place in both the old ones and the new ones. Or Haley somehow makes that battle last 3 or 4 months, because at one point Cain is going to go get his daughter, and then he comes back with his daughter, all real quick.
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of where you want to read into that. And then the new ones, we see the new scrolls, we see a lot more devastating things happen for nations, where in the first scrolls, we saw devastating things happen for casters, right? We saw Baldwin lose Mr. Clog, we saw Vlad die, we've seen Damiano die, right? Mad Hammer's rumored to have died, Ixixkius goes through a period where he gets smashed and then is now somewhat fine, right? And you see a lot of this devastation for characters. And then the new one is kind of talking about, there are some devastated characters. Gershade dies, or Gorshade, depending on if you're a Crixian or not.
Yeah.
But his death changes the landscape of Ios to the point that it's the faction that we all call the Elves, and we all know as Iosians, are really the retribution of Skara, or Skyra, depending on how you want to pronounce that.
Let's call it Ret.
Yeah, Ret. Their god is dead. All the gods are dead now for the Elves.
So for the Elves, but still, like, Moro and Thamar are supposed to be alive, right?
Yeah, they're still alive. They did not transverse over into Cain. I think there's probably implications for that, but they didn't transfer over to Cain, so they're not dead, right? We saw Nero die, the ice god, or Nessor died, the ice god, and we saw Skara die, who was the god of rebirth, goddess of rebirth. And she was what the faction was really based on, is people getting the elves killing off evil human mages that were potentially harming her.
Oh, so that's what they're supposed to be doing,
That's what their goal was, yeah. And she's now dead. She dies at the hands of a now Eldrick Elara.
Oh, okay. I'd heard about, like, Elara killing someone important, but I missed who it was, so, okay. So it's a god.
Yeah, she just kills a god, and then she brings the Sword of Vos to Nissor, and he, has a moment of clarity, and then dies.
So I guess, like, gods in this world must be kind of like, like the Norse gods, right? And, like, how we're, like, they're not invincible, and they can be, killed.
I think that has most to do with the fact that they left the Veld, or the Hurricane, the afterlife, to the real world, which has set off a lot of the events in this. Mm-hmm. And when they made that transfer over, they broke certain metaphysical rules that rendered them human. So are they dead? Has all their energy been displaced? Or are they now going to reform somewhere else? We won't know until later, but
especially when there's a god of rebirth. That seems like
it appears from what we see, what we've seen in this, most of the gods are they're dead for now, for sure.
Okay.
Right? They no longer interact with Cain.
All right.
And so one of the big overarching themes in the last bit is we see kind of like the death of factions. We see factions completely kind of get demolished to the point that they're no longer relevant, and we see them kind of change. A lot of them kind of change, right?
Get out of here, Menoth! You're trash,
right,
Stevie.
Retribution's no longer a faction. We see that it's kind of, and through the new upcoming IKRPG stuff, we see it's now an eldritch horror wasteland, right? Where you have the eldritch horror Iosians, who did exist previously but were in smaller numbers, and now kind of small pockets of a new resistance of the Dawn Guard led by Viros.
I think the mercenaries are supposed to be smashed as well, because weren't they saying in the first half where like the mercenaries were being used to kind of like block off and try and like be the first, you know, pawns to be used against the Infernals? I believe that's like what's like Damiano's in the front lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's heavily suggested, right? Damiano's there, Mad Hammer's there. Both of them don't seem to have good outcomes.
McBain, did he die?
I don't think they say McBain dies. We know Damiano dies, and we know that Mad Hammer comes to a bad end. We don't know what happens with McBain, but they do. McBain literally mentions that the forces that they have here are mostly mercs, because Signar's too busy dealing with the cleanup of their nation from all of the infernals that have kind of sprung out of nowhere.
Sure. So maybe a question for you, because again, you know a lot more of this fluff than I do, is that to me, this seemed to be a stark contrast from what they normally do. That normally, if I ever got, like in Mark II, a rule book that had some stories in it, it was kind of like, it didn't matter, right? Nothing really changed. It might be a nice little story like, oh, there was this battle, but nothing really matters. Whereas like this is like, no, people are dying, things are changing. Is that right? Or do you feel like back in Mark 1, and maybe I missed it in Mark 2, that this is something that was more normal?
Well, we saw certain like the boundaries of nations change, and we saw like not meaningless characters, but characters that were important to the setting but not played in the game die, right? So at the very beginning, we see the invasion of Khador into Lael, and then you have Signar rise up to fight them, and it was revealed that, oh no, there's a big Crixian, the Crix are using an Orogoth temple to make Phexius his own god. He's going to steal all these people's souls. And there's a big battle between Haley, Stryker, Denny, all of these different characters, and eventually Phexius gets defeated, mostly through the actions of Terminus.
Okay.
Terminus shows up with Phexius' his phylactery and goes, hey, by the way, if you mess around too much, I'm just going to kill you.
Okay.
And so that kind of dissolves that. The Harbinger plays a major part. She ends up dying but coming back to life, right? And that's one of those you've had kind of a Marvel-esque kind of, you die, but do you really die? Stryker dies temporarily. Dies in quotations here. It turns out it's a junior that's wearing his armor, and Magnus thinks that he kills him. Turns out it was just a junior.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, it seems like a lot of the stories in the past were more like, hey, it turns out gargantuans were tied up in the mountains the whole time. It's like, you know, maybe there might be there just like to introduce new characters, but as opposed to now it's like, this is dead and this is dead and Menoth is off to the waste and all these types of things, right? Like,
yeah, so a lot of it was keeping the status quo of the characters being fine, but the nations certainly changing in how they operate, right?
Sure.
The first 3 books deal almost primarily with the engagement of the Ileales War, right? You have Superiority, you have Legends, and you have... my brain's going to skip on that. Escalation. All those 3, it goes Escalation, Superiority, and then Legends, right? And Legends somewhat delves into it like a small fight between Signar and Zuul, right, where Stryker becomes Darth Stryker and he threatens to kill a bunch of Menites.
Oh, okay.
Because he's just done with the engagement, and the main character that dies there is Voil, the Hierarch Voil, the leader of the of Zuul, and then it allows for Severius to take over for him, and then Severius ends up dying in a book. But what we see is that, yeah, there's a definitive change between the Hench Scrolls and the previous books, where all the characters were generally fine. They might end up injured just to kind of advance their storyline, but status quo is almost maintained, right? This war is perpetual and is not going to end. And this, it's... Okay, well, we murdered off all of these characters. Retributions, Ios, gone. The Lael and Ord are now one nation. The Queen of Lael marries the King of Ord, which will probably have something... It's going to change how the borders operate, obviously, but it's also going to change how the Crucible Guard operate, right? Because now... Are they going to keep their funding from King Ord, or the King Bard, who is keeping them funded, or is he going to make them into the regular army? right? So it'll be a big change in how that faction functions in the Fluff, right? Where you see Khador. You know, I think that it seemed likely that she was about to die at the last battle when the Butcher just kind of throws his hands up and goes, "Nope, taking care of my adoptive daughter later, guys."
Okay.
Right, he's lost Lola. She's completely shattered now.
Oh, okay. But isn't... Oh, that's right. I was going to say, but isn't there a Butcher 4 that still has it, but that's a different timeline, because RiotQuest is a different stream where the Infernal's 1.
And he doesn't have Lola in that. If you look at it, it's a fell axe.
Oh, okay.
Right, Lola is a mechanical axe that he actually takes from a worker robot worker jack that he finds in the middle of nowhere, and for some reason someone put a glyph on it that doubled its user strength, because, you know, logic.
Just put that on everything.
Logic.
Yeah.
But you know, and so Lola gets completely destroyed, and it kind of frees him from his war nature.
Oh, okay.
Right, for the longest time he's been mentally ill. He's been very sick. The axe gets destroyed.
So it's like Maddox's axe did the same thing, right?
One was cursed. One was just more of a
World Ender, is it called?
Rathrock.
Okay. Same idea.
And then that's currently being held by Chromac.
That's right. Yeah. Maybe, unless he died. We'll have to find.
Well, I don't. Again. So, you know, we'll talk about trolls in a second.
Sure.
We'll talk about trolls where they don't have anything to say.
Okay.
Right. So we see the Khador kind of the Empress lose her major control piece, which is the Butcher. Right. If you didn't agree with her, she was going to send the big bag of boogeyman.
Yeah.
And he's stood up to her and said, "I'm not dealing with this anymore," and takes his adoptive daughter out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. And the kingdom kind of gets ransacked by infernal forces led by Grapnel.
Okay. Who's Grapnel?
Regina Gravnol. Her last name Gravnoy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Regina.
Yeah. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So that what's going on with Khador, right? Like, she's lost a lot of power now. Apparently, in the IKRPG, she's kind of reorganized how the country operates because she has one of Vlad's heirs.
Okay.
And also following that, she's used the Kayazi to kind of eliminate all the lords that weren't maybe on board with all of her plans.
Sure.
During all of this turmoil. Right, so they're kind of re-gearing up to be able to go back to war. Signar's greatly changed from the end of Blood of Kings to now. Right, Leto's no longer king. He's still alive, but he's no longer king. He's High Chancellor.
Oh, who's the king now?
The king is Julius, the Vinter's son.
Oh, okay.
Vinter actually shows up for a little bit in this as a ghost.
That's right. I read that. That was in the first half with Haley, yeah?
Yeah. She brings back a bunch of ghosts from the past. Vinter shows up, and apparently he's good to fight as a ghost.
Sure, why not?
Right, so, and Julius is a lot more peaceful. He tries to make peace with Khador. Deliberately, they send a Rusk at the very beginning of the Hench Scrolls and go, okay, well, the Emperor sends him to his death. She's like, you're gonna go to Signar, and if they kill you, you know, that's fine, 100% fine with me. In fact, I'm kind of rooting for this.
Okay.
And
Khador is a bunch of jerks, aren't they?
Right. And Julius sends him back, saying, "Hey, listen, you know what? I've been told about these terrible prophecies. It seems like something bad's about to befall all of us. You know, we need everyone on board, because if we either fight this all together or we fight it alone, and it's not going to work well."
Yeah.
So yeah, Julius seems to be a far more even-tempered kind of king, right? And he listens to Magnus. Magnus is one of his prized warcasters who's...
Hooray!
So Signar seems fine, besides the fact that they've lost most of their main cast.
Yeah.
Haley phases out of existence. Striker's dead, because he dies at the end of Stormbreaker.
Yeah, that was in the whole airship battle, right?
Yeah. And then Kane seems to now become he's going to go into full daddy mode over Cynthia, who's apparently also a warcaster. Convenient at the time that they all show up into a giant battle. She's, oh, by the way, you're a warcaster that can take over Ace.
Hooray, go get him.
You got this, girl.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. So he's getting up there, so it's likely we'll see his progeny start coming out as warcasters, because apparently they are, and taking over that central leadership role, right? Again, we talked about Protectorate. It's completely devastated into 3 factions now.
Yeah. So I saw parts of that was before, and parts of it was in the new part here. So the first half and the second half. And so I know there's a big section of it that's like marching off into the desert, right?
Yeah, so it's broken into 3 different groups, right? You have the Exemplars that are all far in Krios in the Northern Crusades, so they're still probably in Leol.
Okay.
You have Fiora as the Protector of the Flame, and her forces seem to be severely weakened. And she's seeming to be going down a very dark path, because we all know that she becomes an infernal.
Yeah.
Right, so it'll be interesting to see, if the new Protectorate kind of changes to be darker and darker, because they were already evil.
They don't really mention the other infernal casters, though, right? Like, I don't think that, from what I saw, like Gaston and then Sloane wasn't in there, right?
Yeah, there's no reference of any of the other ones. Malakoff doesn't show up. Sloane doesn't show up.
All right.
Right, who are the other... Lucas doesn't show up. Right,
okay.
So maybe maybe we'll see how that happens, or they just, maybe it all gets forgotten in the wash.
Maybe, yeah, we'll see what they do.
So you have Fiora's faction, then you have the faction of Sovereign Durant, who just kind of peacefully goes, "We're just leaving. We're leaving to Alchemir, the southern part of the continent."
That's the desert one, right?
It's kind of green, very like you once you get past the Bloodstone marches, there's a big green area at the very bottom.
Okay.
And it's actually currently inhabited by a race. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. These cannibalistic creatures that also worship Menoth.
Oh, well, that's handy.
Yeah. But Menoth by a different name.
Okay.
Don't know if they'll show up in the new series, but who knows?
We'll find out.
Yeah. Joining the new Menoth group is going to be, I guess, the Trollkin now. The Trollkin have been suggested that they're going to settle their own lands in Alchemir, so that they're no longer... They kind of got a bum deal from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
They had all this territory as the Mulgar, then they kind of got shoved into the line of fire between Scorn and Signar and Kador. There's a couple groups in like different spots, but they're kind of fractured. And now the United Nation, with Gunbjorn apparently still being fine, are all going to be now moving to Alchemir to have their own nation.
Okay, fair enough. So if they're all there, you'd think that either they're going to be friends or battle.
Yeah. Durant seems like a very kind of peaceful kind of guy, right? He's, while the previous caste in the Synod, which is the government of the Protectorate, they were all, at least in the old D20 books, they were, once you were Scrutator, you were just evil. You were lawful evil.
Okay.
That is how that worked.
Just change your personality automatically.
Well, you join, it's like, oh, I guess we're evil now. Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So it's kind of... he seems to be very much the Order of the Night, or Order of the Wall. Right? Just kind of peaceful and calm. He wants people to live happy lives, despite the Order of the Wall being one of those factions that looks like it got completely crushed.
Okay.
Right? We lose Durst. We lose Vilmon. And then Harbinger dies in the final battle.
So I missed that. How did Harby actually die?
She's facing off against Omedeus, and Omedeus kind of
Smack.
And then Testament shows up.
Okay.
She opens up a gateway between her and Urkane, the city of Man in Urkane, which is where all of Menoth's followers go. And Testament shows up and goes, "No more souls for you." And
okay.
Kind of like how Bane loses all of his powers when he loses the venom.
Yeah.
Amadeus goes, "Wait, what?"
Ooh, oh no.
And then he ends up getting completely waylasted by Alexia. And trapped into the sword.
Yeah, we knew the sword was going to kill someone eventually, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting because if you read through it, I mean, the sword seems like a heavily the Witchfire sword seems heavily necromantic, like it's got some evilness to it.
Sure,
but she keeps talking to all these Menoth, or not Menoth angels, Morrowind angels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like they show an Archon shows up. It's like, yeah, over that way.
Okay.
Right. She's leading the Legion of the. Is it Legion? It's not Legion of the Damned. It's
Legion of Lost Souls.
Legion of Lost Souls, which is a Morrowind army.
Yeah.
So apparently the Witchfire, not that bad.
Okay.
Surprise. Right. So, yeah, we see the Protector completely fractured into these three factions where they're not likely going to be much of a threat to anybody. I imagine the Northern Crusade, when all the Exemplars like, well, I want to be back with my family, are going to just kind of leave as they go along, leaving only a further smaller and smaller order of knights.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens with the Temple Flame Guard. They're all very desperately loyal to Fiora, right? They viewed her as their mom. She viewed them as her children. So that seems very...
Guess there's Infernals now.
There'll be Infernals, right?
Yeah.
We see that in the end parts of this, the Convergence of Cirrus, initially they try to bring their god to Cain. Turns out they're not going to end up doing that. They're going to ship everyone off into
the other way.
And lose their chance to convene with their god. Yeah. But most of their upper management gone. Right, Lucant leaves to go into the upper world.
So here's a fluff question for you. As a person that reads and digests these stories, would you have characters that you love the idea of? Do you prefer when they go in and have a big battle and maybe they fall and die, or do you prefer when they're like, see ya, and they just go through a gate and leave?
Both have their point, right? Lucant leaving makes sense as a character who wants to lead people into the future and set up a better society. It makes sense that he wouldn't just die. Okay. Right? He's going to use his chance. The Butcher is one of my favorite characters. I, in fact, even wrote a screenplay based off of a short story that they wrote, and I would love to see that being made.
Sure.
It's fascinating. I always thought he was going to become like a god of vengeance or a god of bloodlust and war. Seeing him change from being, a crazy, being somewhat sane at the very beginning, going completely insane, and then kind of like returning back to a more normal stance by having this stabilizing child who was introduced in that short story. Not everyone dies. That's not the ending I would have predicted, and he doesn't end in an epic battle. He just kind of goes, okay, I'm done. and I actually really like that, right?
But that's even kind of different as well. So maybe the difference I'm trying to talk about is the idea of either there's a clear end to the arc of the story of either they die or I'm going to go be a dad now, as opposed to I'm going into the gate. And the reason why I asked that is that to me, when I saw people going into the gate, it just felt so hollow to me. That's it? Because I know, or I'm pretty sure, they're never going to go and talk about them again. All right? We're never going to, jump ahead and be like, okay, this is now Warmachine 40K, and we're talking about, this crazy planet battle. So it's oh, they're just gone forever. And it seems like I would rather be they just die, right? Come out and fight and die.
I agree with that, right? You kind of want to have a completion to the story, right? The Lucant story arc ends and makes sense, where it's he's going into the future to have this other future. Gatsby going into the gate and escaping makes sense because, well, you know what? He's this planning, scheming guy, and he can only get so far under Torok's rule.
Plus, people hate Gatsby Forest. Now it's gone.
Yeah, just gone. Brian. But yeah, other characters, just kind of poofing out of existence. It does seem kind of hollow, right? An example of that is Vlad. A lot of players hated how Vlad died, and I can kind of see why, right? Instead of going out with this epic battle where he's fighting Zadaroth and doing it, he gets choked out to death.
Yeah.
Right? It would. Sometimes you can have that Stark character death where it's one of those, he's charging in and then takes an arrow to the head and he's just dead, and you're like, what the hell just happened? But this wasn't that, right? He gets choked out, and that's it.
If I remember correctly, that part of the story was supposed to be a little bit more emotional, though, because wasn't Sorsha kind of overseeing, and that's what really got her going?
You would think that, right? But a lot of it wasn't told from Sorsha's point of view.
Yeah.
Right? It's all told from Vlad's point of view, and Sorsha kind of gets told by a second party, Harkovich tells her, it looks like Vlad is down, and she's like, well, bomb the area, no one gets to his body, right? But you don't see a lot of character through that. It's... Right, we understand she's supposed to be an ice queen, and the only kind of warm spot in her heart is Vlad, but you don't get that, right? And so that seems like that was kind of the letdown, right? Where he doesn't go on an epic end, right? She just flees through the gate afterwards, and right, the coolest thing that they end up doing is dropping Karchev off of an airship to go fight people.
That was pretty neat. I like that.
Drop pod.
Yeah, why not? It makes sense to me.
So yeah, the Convergence leadership completely decimated. Right now, you have split factions between Aurora, and I don't know if anyone actually was interested in following her. That was actually part of the leadership. But you know, the Architect's gone, Iron Mother's gone, Nemo's gone. So their leadership is completely destroyed. Right. It'll be interesting to see if they get new casters to recover from that, or if the factions just kind of
It's Aurora now. That's it. It's all people played anyway.
It's all people did, right? The Infernals are completely defeated, right? And it didn't take very long. They showed up, and they're like, yeah, we're real badass until everyone shows up and starts whomping on us like redheaded stepchildren.
Well, it kind of had to happen, right? Like, either they win and everything's apocalypse, or they lose and then you can go on as normal. So
yeah, they could have spaced that out, right? I think that having this big epic claiming all at once was kind of a letdown. Like, one of those things what they could have done is kind of like feed it a bit more, being like, oh, all these infernalists are working their way into stuff and they're making these arrangements and these deals and these plans, right?
Like, maybe they start on just one side. It's like, oh, wow, over here, Kador's fighting the Infernals while things are going on. And as they keep on expanding, like, oh, wow, Infernals is really a problem. Now they have to work together.
Yeah.
Maybe that would have been a better way to do it. You could have spaced it out. Yeah. But we weren't getting fluff.
We were getting fluff, right? So we've seen Amadeus get defeated and locked into a sword. Agathon, which, by the way, when they write his stuff, they need to be far more careful with that, because a lot of it was just they, and it was really hard to tell who was talking.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be for Agathon, though.
Yeah, Agathon is supposed to be they, but I would throw his name a far bit more into that, because people are like, who is they? Right?
Yeah. My first time reading it, I had a lot of problem for sure. And I was like, okay, now I understand what's going on. And then it made sense.
Yeah.
So
Zadaroth is gone into a void. Right, she gets teleported with the Iron Mother into a void and is now completely gone.
I don't know this part of the story. So what's this void that happened?
So what ends up happening is that they're about to the Infernals feel like they're about to win.
Yeah.
And the Convergence goes, okay, they're about to win. So we've gotten the last of what we think are going to be the survivors through the gate. So let's reprogram the gate to send everyone to a void of nowhere.
Okay.
So they end up, Iron Mother takes Zadaroth and tosses her into there with her.
Okay.
Right? And they shut down the gate right after that, so that there's no escape.
All right.
So, I mean, not that...
So Agathon's still alive?
Agathon is still a free agent, and his plan their plan at the very end seems very much to be, what contracts do I have, and how do I kind of play this the slow burn?
Yeah, okay.
Right? Not that I don't know if Zadaroth would have been doing so well. She kind of... Her bosses, the Triumvirate, were very much mad at her, and then she lost the the Guardian of Souls, and that seemed to go very poorly. And the last one is like Scorn. Scorn just kind of gets beat and then leaves. Right? The Elves betray them the last possible second, just wiping out, I guess, a large chunk of the Western army. And they go, okay, well, I guess we're done. We would conquered half of Ios, but we're just leaving now.
Okay.
They don't seem to suffer any major losses in characters besides Zuul dying in the previous books. Everyone, Hexeris is fine. Makeda's fine. Morgul might not be fine.
It seems like they, for all the story, the vast majority was on the Warmachine side, and very little is on the Horde side.
I would agree. Right? You don't see a lot of trolls. You don't see a lot of Circle. We don't know what Thagros is doing this entire time. Right?
I actually wonder if this next one they do with Orgoth is going to be a lot on the Horde side, or whether it's like, whatever, back to Warmachine.
Well, that could be it, right? We don't know what's going on with Thagros. We know that Saren flees off to the other side. Whether she survives is a different story.
That's right. Saren leaves, and Rias is still here, wondering why Saren left, right?
Well, she feels that immense separation because they were mystically bound.
Yeah, okay.
We know that Raven, for the longest time, she pulled out her Athink and seemed to be fine and was wanting to rebel against Everblight, but doesn't in the end. She returns the Athink, so it's possible that Saren is alive.
Okay.
And we might see vestiges of her in the future of Neo Mechanica.
I don't know. I don't know if they're actually going to bother doing that and making the link between the two game, because in my understanding, when you play Warcaster, you don't really have named casters, right?
As far as I'm aware, they have named characters, but no, they don't have named casters because you're a character that's on a ship that's controlling the flow and ebb of the battle. You're a Warcaster, but remotely, right? Yeah,
it makes it more of a feel so like you could be the caster overseeing the battle, just like the caster is supposed to be. So, who knows? Maybe they will.
Yeah. Right, a lot of this seems, and so like we've seen, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factions just get completely wrecked.
Get out of here.
And the ones you don't really see a lot of, Crix, doesn't lose a lot of guys. They seem like they're fine, right? Currently, they're down Asphyxius and they're down Terminus, who got defeated in the last book and hasn't reconstituted himself from his phylactery.
Cephalix isn't even mentioned at all, right?
Cephalix isn't mentioned at all. I think they're fine, though, because it's one of those things where they're a society of psychics.
Sure.
So you couldn't be an Infernal in a society of psychics, because there's no secrets.
Oh, yeah, they'd all know.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
Right? And there would be the one group that'd be like, well, we have all these drudges. Do you just want their souls? Because we don't care about it. Just take it.
Wow, why didn't they go to them for deals? That would have been perfect.
Right? So I think that they're probably they're fine, right?
Okay.
Signar seems like it's fine for the most part. Like they've lost their main cast, but room for new cast, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we finally get that Sloane character arc that, besides her dating some trencher.
Oh, that's supposed to be happening? Okay.
Well, that's why she turns to Infernals, is that her boyfriend, who's either a trencher or a long gunner, gets put into mortal danger, and
oh, okay.
She sells her soul to save him.
I just assumed that there was traitors and there was no story behind it. So nice that there's something.
There's some story behind it. Mercs, for the most part, like, dwarves seem absolutely fine. Dwarves seem like they were barely touched. Besides losing Madhammer,
yeah,
the dwarves seem like they're totally fine. Right? We've seen a lot of death in the Warcasters of Mercs, but right, Steelheads still exist. Right?
Steelheads, I mean, they're just general people. So as long as there's people that will fight for money, there's only mercenaries.
Right, yeah. We might see the Highborn Covenant, which was the old Lael-Ease forces, kind of drop down because they're no longer, it's really not a Lael anymore, right? It's now the Kingdom of Ord and Lael.
Yeah, all joined together.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And
what ended up with Ashlyn?
Ashlyn ends up fleeing with the Queen to Ord. The King of Ord shows up, Barden's like, okay, we're leaving, and they're like, okay, we're leaving.
Okay. So still alive.
Still alive. The Grimkin have taken over Saul. So, now Signar does have a problem where they have a Nightmare Kingdom right beside them.
It seems bad.
You might want to blow that bridge up now.
Yeah, exactly.
Circle, the only ones I think that they might lose, well, they might lose Kruger and they might lose Kaya. But beyond that, they'll have to be dealing with the corruption of the ley lines, whether that was related to the Infernals or related to the Dragons, is anyone's guess.
Yeah, that's kind of how they did. There's like the gods on the Warmachine side and the dragons on the Horde side. Although I guess there's tons of different gods over there, so that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Like the worm and all that stuff like you're saying, yeah.
Legion seems fine. Like, again, we don't know what's happening with Thagrosh, but they've only seemed to have lost one, and they didn't have any forces really at the battle. So it's just kind of what they're doing is what they're doing. Though that might change, right? Because now that Nissor's dead, the Nis might be royally effed.
Yeah, and more desperate to find something. So
yeah, right, they had kind of used Everblight to kind of solve a lot of their soulless issues, but now that they have nothing generating souls, what's going to happen?
Okay.
Minions seem fine. Like Barnabas shows up, but seems to be doing just fine, murdering everything in his path.
Yeah, they didn't really do much in the story, right? Unless they're more in the second half.
No, they're mentioned in the first half, and that's about it.
Okay. We're alive. Bye.
Yeah, we're here, Barbatus. I'm a god now. Oh, good to see you, boss.
It's kind of like with Muppets with all the little cameos, right? It's like
yeah. And trolls. They, we see Gunbjorn. They kind of make an alliance with the minions, but then they all decide to leave. So like out of the factions that are still kind of like viable to be like big major players, we have Crix, Signar, Mercs, Grimkin, Circle, Legion, and Minions, right? Everyone else is either left. Kador, I guess, is in there. Is either left or they've fallen apart.
Now, I guess another thing that we don't really know is that when they decide to pick this up again, are they going to go with because the book is supposed to be ahead in time, the role playing game.
Yeah.
How far ahead in time is that?
I think that they said it's within the last 10 to 15 years.
So, I mean, if you jump ahead 10 to 15 years, I'm going to assume that when they pick up the story again, that's what they're going to do. Otherwise, you'll have 3 different timelines you're trying to balance. The Riot Quest one, which I guess doesn't really matter, but then, the current one and then the role-playing. So, I'm assuming they're going to jump to where the role-playing is, and that means, over 10 to 15 years, a lot of things can change, right? These kids could be full adults now that are full warcasters, right? So,
and that's what we're going to see, right? I imagine imagine that we're going to see that we're not going to see a big presence for Menoth, right? They might fall even to a merc status, right? Or they'll just be a really small kind of ragtag kind of army, right? No longer a major threat, right? Hopefully we see more cephalic stuff, more merc stuff.
Weren't they Hungerford's baby?
They were Hungerford's baby.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, Convergence was DC Soul's baby, right?
Okay.
He was really into the whole everything having to be a prime number, which is kind of how a lot of their faction was developed, right? And so we haven't seen a lot of them. I don't, like, they're in no place to really be of anything unless we're going to see major changes.
I'm just thinking, too, if everything's going to be a prime number, it makes it hard to balance the army. Because, like, okay, I have to jump to the next or previous prime number.
I think they dropped that.
Yeah.
Right? We see that the Elf Kingdom is now virtually desolate, so we're going to probably... Like, if we were to start the game right now, right? So we end the game, we start a new game, right?
Yeah.
I think the factions you would see is an undead Elf Kingdom.
Or maybe the remaining elves are now mercenaries or something, or
right,
who knows?
And you're gonna see the remaining elves being kind of a smaller ragtag function of a band of heroes, right, holdouts, and even though that sounds far more cool, like a role playing kind of aspect, where it's like, oh, we're gonna go hang out with these elves. Oh, they're all gone. What happened to this army base?
Okay, yeah.
Right. So if we're gonna start the game from new, undead elves, undead Signar, Mercs, Grimkin. Right.
So basically, Alexia could just be ahead of a whole bunch of dead things now.
Yeah. Though the question is Grimkin going to still be around? Because their major function was to punish the wicked people, right? That's why they got brought out from Hurricane, right? Is to punish punish wicked people so that the Infernals didn't have that many souls to take.
Yeah.
Now that the Infernals claimed a whole bunch of people left, a whole bunch of people are dead.
Yeah.
Are the Grimkin going to have as much power anymore? Because, right, they've kind of done their function. Their goal was to punish the wicked people, and how many wicked people are left? Are they just going to kind of dissolve further down as an army?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
So where do you think that this is going? So we obviously know that the next step is going to be Orgoth. So seeing what you saw with all these scrolls, what would you guess is going to be the next chapter and how it's going to be playing out?
Well, I imagine that we're going to see a lot of... not that I want to see factions get kind of demolished, but we're going to see the evolution of these factions as smaller factions.
Okay.
Right? Where I think we're going to see a lot of technology jumps. And the Orgoth are going to be this invading force where you're going to have Khador and Signar fighting each other again. I don't know how they're going to fight each other, though, because the new Ord Lael Kingdom is going to be directly in the way.
Okay.
Right? So maybe there will be that kind of dip where the Umbrian Kingdom is. Maybe that's still where all the fighting's going to be. That and the Glimmerwood. Or Thornwood. That's the wooded area that's in between those two countries.
Sure. Take your word for it.
Yeah. So we're going to see probably more fighting there. And the Orgoth are going to be called by... Because the Henchhold was actually developed by the Orgoth.
Oh.
It was one of the few things that they left behind when they left last go around. They tried to burn as much of their history out as possible because they didn't want to give the Iron Kingdoms any sort of advantages.
Yeah, okay.
So the only things that we've seen so far from them is a couple of random tombs that are filled with these soul-bound items.
Okay.
We've seen the Temple of Garoth, which is the events in Escalation to Ascension. Where all the and that's where Gatsby tries to become a god, and that temple gets destroyed.
So is the Witchfire Alexia's sword supposed to be an Orgoth weapon?
It's hinted at being older.
Okay.
So
probably
it's probably not an Orgoth thing.
Okay.
It's probably belongs to somebody else. From what it looks like, Morrowind and Thamar might have more to do with that.
Oh, okay.
Because it's supposed to be this evil necromantic item. But Morrowind's totally fine with the person wielding it. In fact, loans them his army of undead folk.
Well, when you're trying to save the planet, maybe you just do some things like that. But
it is suggested to be older than the Orogoth, and none of the runes seem to match. None of the design seems to match. Orogoth stuff tends to have lots of faces attached to it, right? So you can see that through any depictions of their armor.
Okay.
You look at the Doom Reavers' swords and stuff. They all have the screaming faces on them. Right, Rune has a shield. There's very good evidence that the Skulls of Hate on Deathjack were Orgoth in origin.
Okay, so now Karchev will be Orgoth.
It's possible, certainly possible. So I imagine that she's going to still be a central character.
That actually be just a little side jump there. That'd be interesting to have a caster like that, where, okay, when the man's in charge, then it's fighting for Khador, but then sometimes the machine takes over and it's fighting for Orgoth.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, because originally it seemed to suggest that it was actually attached to a living warrior.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually just kind of found its way onto a jack and was like, oh, this is even better.
Okay.
Less personality to fight through.
And then it found us an angry face, and...
Yeah. Now I found an angry potato.
Yeah, basically.
So, I imagine Legion's going to be a faction. Like, if we're starting the game again, Legion's still fine, right? They'll still kind of be hitting, missing. And minions, and we might see some of those, like, further out factions come back later, right? It's like, we've come back! We want our stuff back. Right? But if we're starting the game from new, which seems like, like everyone seems to be hinting that Mark IV is just around the corner, right? The game's at such a large point that we might see these new factions come out. Well,
there is a lot of similarities to what we're seeing here to what happened with GW, right? Where they had this big, huge event, killed off a bunch of casters, and then redid the addition. So, I mean, if you're making big changes, maybe, but then a lot of people are saying as well, Warmachine doesn't need a new edition, right? With the big updates from Faye, that we can just keep on going with that. So
yeah, and it's got a living rule book now, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that they need to make big changes, but if we were just to start the game from anew, right? That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Okay.
So, anything that you would... Do you have any favorite moments, Brian, from this? Do you remember any favorite moments?
Well,
do you need to borrow 80 pages of...
No. I mean, the parts that were always nicest with these is when you could get in early. So, I mean, if all the different tweets were already out for that story, okay, you kind of read through them all and then it was all easy. But I liked just the suspense of it. That was probably my favorite moments, where I'd read like, oh cool, Damiano's there, I wonder what's going to happen. Oh, he's charging in there. Uh-oh, that's not looking so good. So I liked that. So as much as, and maybe we can talk a bit about this, as much as this format of storytelling I'm not a huge fan of, because it's not very, I don't know,
accessible? Like, it's one of those things you have to kind of go out of your way to look for it?
No, not just that. Just like, it's not organized, right?
Oh.
Like, my understanding is that the way that this was done is like with PP, they're like, hey, who wants to write the story today? Here you go. And so, like, it was not meant to be really pieced together.
They bounced it between 3 different writers, right?
Okay.
Obviously, there's Matt Gates. It's Getz. Don't mistake him for the other Matt.
Sure.
A guy by the name of Mike. And I think Doug had a big hand in a lot of the initial stuff. I don't think he had a big hand in a lot of this stuff.
Okay, I thought it was like a whole bunch of people there. It's like, okay, your turn.
One or 3, and you can kind of see, like, I would agree with you. The first half of this is extremely well organized. You could bundle it at the very end to have a larger stories where, like, a lot of the stuff happens sequentially. But the first half of this is all done, like, I think top was like 12 tweets.
Okay, yeah.
Right, and that's these 12 bits of story and it extended longer, right? And so it was far more suspenseful, because it's like, okay, well, there's only 6 tweets and they end on kind of a cliffhanger, right?
Yeah.
The end of this, I don't know if they lost the thread of what their plan was, or they just kind of jammed a whole bunch of stuff in together, because there's like 36 there. I think the longest one I saw was 36.
I thought it was like a 40-something when I was scrolling through.
I think the highest one I saw was 36 tweet thing, and it bounces between a lot of character points of views, right? And I broke it up into this when I was doing it, because it's like, I don't get why you would have like, it goes from Asphyxius to Lucant to Haley to this, all within the same 46 or crazy messages.
I guess, if nothing else, I prefer this to what we were getting before, because they were doing the
You mean nothing?
books. Well, yeah, at least with Mark II, they were first having the little release books whenever they're doing their big releases for everything at one time, and you get a little bit of story in there, and then, like you said, nothing. So compared to nothing, I prefer this. Like I said, I really like the whole idea where you were, the suspense of waiting from one tweet to the next. I just kind of wish that it was more prepared. And maybe I'm just wrong with what's going on, but if it was something where, okay, they're going to sit down, make some story, and then slowly feed it out through tweets. And maybe it's something that's cheaper for them because, I mean, putting out a tweet is nothing as opposed to like putting out books. So if that's the way they can do it, that'd be fantastic. But I'll take what I can get, I guess.
I agree with you. I actually really like the format because it's one of those like, you sit down and read a couple of tweets, maybe what's effectively maybe a page or two, right? So you know you go to your bathroom, you're eating lunch, right? You read through that page and you're like, okay, this is really engaging stuff, right? Versus a lot of people don't have time to sit down and read the faction books again usually had a big chunk of that stuff was history, and then they have small stories that were built in. The magazine No Quarter had like all these short little stories which were really cool, but you had to subscribe to the magazine, right? And the magazine's no longer available on their webpage. Even the digital No Quarter Prime, not available anymore.
Yeah.
Right, and I can get that, like storage fees, and you're kind of like making magazines print magazine is a thriving industry, Brian. Just a thriving industry.
Absolutely.
Same thing with print books. Right, where this is digestible really quickly, right? And then you can eventually just like, I want to read more of it. Well, you can go back a whole bunch of pages, right? The fact that like in 2 years they have just created such a dense lore book is based off of just a couple tweets is really cool.
But it's also kind of tainted in that you can't really trust it, right? Like if this was a book, it's like, here is the book, this is how you go. But this is like, okay, this is a bunch of mad visions and who knows what's really real. It's also kind of like, did Vlad die? Like, are they going to come out later? Like, I don't know. I really hope that that's just there to kind of guard them. So if later on they're like, oh, this character is now here. Like, well, wait a second, then did die? No, that was a mad vision. So...
I think that's part of it. Again, it's also harking back to the very beginning of the origins of having an unreliable narrator. Right?
Yeah.
Somebody who's, just telling you a story, right? This is 300, you're getting told the story from Dalos, who's, like, oh yeah, our king fought bare naked against all of these guys coming in. Well, is this true? Well, it's true if you look at it from a certain point of view. Right? I like that it harkened back to that by having an unreliable narrator that tells you at the front, I am unreliable. Right? And allows you to kind of mess around being like, you know what? We killed Vlad. We did not get a good response when we killed Vlad. Vlad's still alive. Turns out that this was a fail. This was one of the mad visions that didn't work, right? I think that's kind of cheap in a way because you're not standing behind your work. But that being said, it gives you an out, right? And I do like how it harkens back to the original of like, no one's telling you these things are this. The emperor sits on the golden throne, and there's a million souls that get fed to him every day, right? Yeah. This is this is a character in the setting going, well, from what I've been told, this is what happens.
So here's another thought I believe at the end of the second half, the hermit is like, that's it, I'm done, I'm not getting any more messages, right?
No, he doesn't really go into that, right? Actually, the last one is told almost specifically from Agathon's point of view, right?
Oh, okay.
Agathon nervously fumbles through he's trying to figure out how he's going to deal with the new technology that comes out of Housefire and the Scorn warrior sorcerers, right? He doesn't, at no point does it ever say that, like, this is the end, right?
I thought I read that somewhere, but maybe...
Right? Yet best exploit the more familiar, even if the Infernals were to taste defeat here and other threats loomed near, the humans would remain human. They carefully rolled up their Agathon, carefully rolled up the contracts that served as a convenient diversion, and with a renewed sense of purpose, if tempered by necessary vigilance, Agathon planned their next move. First with undermining what would become of the Iron Kingdoms. And foremost was ensuring an infernal presence remained, if not strong, at least persistent to withstand the struggles that laid ahead.
Okay. So, this is supposed to be still from the Henchhold scrolls. Do you think that when they do the Orgoth, they're going to be starting a new Twitter account, and now this will be from somebody else's perspective or something? Or?
That would be a very interesting thought, right? Imagine if it's it's Tales from Lone Survivors, right? The Orgoth are another group of... PP really likes people that enslave other people. Like, that's a big thing with Privateer Press, right? The Scorn enslave people, Crix enslave people, Infernals enslave people, Orgoth enslave people?
Yeah.
So imagine it's survivors telling the stories, right? That as they escape from the Orgoth invasion, maybe it happens in Northern Kador, maybe it happens in a bunch of different areas because they mastered magic technology allows them to get past the three moons having this huge tidal effect on the planet. They can kind of cut through that, so it might be you might see these more organized attacks throughout. But you tell stories from the survivor's point of view is like, Bob comes running away, but he sees Mary Sue the Warcaster come in and fight, right? And does she survive? Does she not survive?
So, but what I was trying to get at there was more so if. I don't think that they're going to continue with this same account for future stories. I think it's just for this whole, Oblivion campaign. And so if there's a new one for the Orgoth one and maybe the new one for the one after that, I mean, some people already feel that these things being posted on Twitter, even though it's really free and for everyone, if they aren't on Twitter, they're like, well, I'm not getting this stuff. And so if it's all of a sudden on Twitter and on multiple accounts, that seems to make the sense of what they would do and not keep it in the singular, but then it also makes it harder to digest.
I think you can get around that. Like, I agree, right? That might be, especially, we only knew about this because of excellent communication that this was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to keep that excellent communication. They might have to do, like a big banner page on their webpage going, hey, listen, this is the new website that you need to be this is a new Twitter handle you need to be handling. But they have been releasing like stories for Warcaster, and I think they did a story for Monpok, but it was released just basically on their webpage. So
okay, yeah.
Whether or not they continue this format, which I think is actually a very good format because it's not just sitting and reading a 10 or 12 page story. It's a lot of community engagement, right? Because everyone's kind of piecemealing this and going, oh, what's going to happen next? What's the storyline? I really enjoy this aspect, right? And everyone loves cliffhangers as much as they all hate cliffhangers.
It pulls you in. You can't help it. You gotta wonder what's going to happen. All right, so any other thoughts of this story and where it's going or how they're delivering it?
Well, I mean, it seems like a lot of the Horde factions have kind of just stepped back again. This will be interesting. I know that they said, hey, we're going to do new books coming out, right?
Yeah.
When the Orgoth drops, we're going to have a new book come out. I wonder if, we will see a lot of the kind of reorganization of this stuff. And if we see it reorganized, will we see a new kind of like Horde, an overall Horde storyline kind of pop out, right? Are we going to see the Giants of Behemoth come from the north, right? Maybe Dire Portents. Are we going to see dragons show up, right? That was something that they heavily hinted at about 5-6 years back, right? And that kind of culminated in the Wrath of the Dragonfather, where Torok and Blithergast fight over one of the cities.
Okay.
And then Torok ends up leaving, and Blithergast ends up getting the Athank of the champion that got defeated.
Okay.
Right, so he ends up going back to Lycazuns, and Blithergast's like, I won, and I'm slightly more powerful than last go-around. This is good?
Dragon still strong?
Right, I wonder, like, this was a full melding of, like, all of the story arcs, except for they kind of abandoned a whole lot of the story arcs. I wonder if we're going to see another split, right, where it's now the adventures of, like, the stuff happening in the Warmachine, the Iron Kingdoms, and the adventures that are happening in the Horde Kingdoms, right? Right? Are we going to see maybe more fight? The Scorn Empire isn't far from Aklamir. Are we going to see them kind of fight amongst the trolls more now that they're kind of in a centralized area? Right? Circle exists everywhere, so you can just pretty much have Circle anywhere. But.
Sure. So, yeah, and I kind of feel like with this next Orgoth one, and I could be wrong, but I mean, they're supposed to have Jax and stuff, so I'm guessing this is going to be another Warmachine story. So if it wasn't Orgoth, if Orgoth is going to be all Warmachine again, and Hordes is having to wait, what do you think would be the story after for Hordes? Like, I know you just said that there would be that there, but usually this is now coming in with a new faction. So what faction do you think would be the new invader or new rising up that they'd be doing on the Horde side?
Well, again, so you could have the Giants of Behemoth, but that would be... We've seen that they've at least discussed that there's going to be a new model size for the game, right?
Yeah, that's right.
They're coming out with 80 mil.
Yeah.
Even though I think Giants would probably be still on the larger one, because they're quite large in comparisons to people. They're in fact larger than most of the Colossals by head or toe.
They're supposed to be that big, okay.
Yeah. Granted, again, that's told from an unreliable narrator. Shylon, the Scorn Slave, tells stories of his homeland of the three great heroes. You have Ajax, the leader. He's a warrior priest. You have Oxalis, who's a kind of a ranger, and then you have Hector, which is a kind of like a gladiatorial Spartan fighter.
Okay.
But right, so we can see that maybe being a faction. Maybe the giants come down and they're like, okay, maybe they're not as large as we thought they were, but like they're this major force that comes. They were able to defeat a dragon, so
okay. And I know from like other systems when they allowed you to make like a giant army in the fantasy side, or like for 40K, like the larger robots, you have an army of them. Like that's why people like playing things like double, triple, colossal. So if they came out with a giant army, people would be all over that because fewer models you have to build and paint. So
we could see dragons become another big faction, right? They kind of hinted at it a little bit, then the storyline kind of got dissolved for this one. But maybe the dragons do come back. Maybe you have, right, there's distinct divisions within the dragons.
Okay.
Right? Blithergast is very different from Skafang, who's very different from Torok, who's very different from Pyromass. Right? Pyromass is dead, though.
And then that would be interesting if, like, to try and end Legion, the other dragons banded together. Now you had, like, this dragon faction. That'd obviously be popular.
Yeah. So. Right, and we've seen that they kind of want to lean into that, like, magnetizing models detail. We've seen that in Warcaster, right? Right, this would be one of those things where your Warcaster might change the concept of your army, right? Maybe if you're Blithergast, you get acid. All your warrior models get acid-based attacks and acid-based spells.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
And then if you take a Skafang, I think his deal is ash.
We already have some stuff like that, right? You can take Durgan and gives fire attacks to all your stuff.
Well, exactly, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't be that alien from the game, right? Other big factions that people talk about are things like Zuul, right? Zuul being the just below Aklamir.
Yeah.
Right? This could be the thing that makes Zuul kind of go, well, you guys are invading, it looks like you guys are invading our territory, right?
And Zuul is like the totem hunter, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Africa of the setting. You have the totem hunter, you have Doc, who's from Zuul.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah. So you have a couple of characters, and it's explored in the pirate novel. They go down to Zuul, and what ends up happening is Shay has a map to Zuul.
Oh, is there treasure there, or is there?
Obviously, there's treasure there.
It's got to be treasure,
right? And I always joke that he's going to come back, and he's like, "Yeah, so I killed a bunch of these guys, and I dropped a Signarin flag. That's fine with you guys, right?" Right. So, and we've seen now that when they're releasing the IKRPG information, right, we've seen a couple more of the different species that they've kind of brought from the old D20 system back.
Okay.
Right, we've seen Dreg, we've seen, right, those are the creatures that kind of have this long skeletal face, and they kind of exist in the underground, right? So we might see more underground stuff.
All right.
Right?
And then you see more Cephalix. Awesome. Any other last thoughts on this?
I'm hoping they keep up with releasing more fluff. I'm hoping that we see lots of really interesting changes in how the factions operate in the future based off of the fluff. And
you kind of have to, right?
Yeah. I'm really excited to see them explore a lot of different elements, especially when you start seeing with the stuff that they're coming out with the IKRPG stuff, right? It's a lot of the new storylines, or a lot of the stuff that they've released in there just seems... You have a lot of terrible realm stuff happening, right? You have you have the undead Iosian wastelands. You have Zuul or Saul being taken over by Grimkin, right? And from a DMing standpoint, which at one point we're going to have to do some DM. We're going to have to play some D&D, Brian.
All right. You
play it with your kids. You can play it with the rest of us, right? We see that the nations become more adventurer friendly.
Okay.
Right. And walking into Saul might have some political intrigue, but now that you have walking into Saul and it turns out that it's inhabited by gremlins and Grimkin, how does that change things, right?
You die. That's what happens.
And maybe we'll see more merc bands come out, right? Like a couple of the books dealt with the Black Dogs.
Oh, Devil Dogs?
No, not Devil Dogs. They actually released a whole bunch of series of those. Eilish is one of the characters in it.
Oh, okay.
That mechanic girl. I need to borrow my phone.
Boss McCord?
No.
The what's her name that flies around?
No,
Widget?
no, not Widget. They have 3 of their own books.
Sure.
Right? One of the other characters' name is Milo. One of the other characters' name is Pog, and so they're part of the Witcherwood, like the box game stuff that they kind of dropped.
Yeah.
Right. So we saw a couple. They also released a couple of images and that short novella about the Strangelight. Right. So maybe we'll see some more like Merc groupings. Right? Especially with that being more like, hey, you know, it's more adventurer friendly.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing from this, too, is like, whereas before in Mark II, you're like, what are they going to do next? Character units, a new character Jack, you know, like that type of design space. But when you really open up the story and say, look, this faction is like splitting into 3 different groups, like with Menoth, and now we have to like completely redefine them. Like that sort of design space means so much more, right? So, yeah, really interested to see what they do with it. So...
Yeah, you know, and you kind of see that with the themes. Maybe the themes are going to be far more prevalent, right? The warrior theme of like Warmachine of Signar is like, you know, gravediggers and right versus like the Storm Division theme, right? So we might see a lot more of that stuff, and that'd be kind of like I've said for a long time that I would like to see upgrade kits to kind of make models look more like theme stuff, right? You know, you could have a defender that's got like a backpack and a bunch of trencher gear, and then you could put, you know, some lightning coils onto it to be like, oh, it's more Storm Division.
Yeah, and I've seen people do conversions like that for themselves. It's not like something that PP provides or anything. So,
yeah. But you know, we're now that we're kind of looking at a whole new world of how factions are, maybe, or again, maybe, big whole. We might see these things happen, right? So. Yeah. We're seeing, you know, Scars, Io's split. We're seeing Protector of Menoth split. Maybe we're gonna see these. We're gonna see a bunch of smaller factions.
Well, I mean, those limited factions sell, so I mean, it makes sense, and they're fun. So, all right. Well, I think we should probably cut it there. But yeah, Dorian, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this.
Well, thank you for having me, Brian. Hopefully, when new stuff comes out, I'll have more to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and to all you out there, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later. Bye.